Hello, my name is Aviva, and today I'm going to be sharing with you a bunch of romance book recommendations with the obsessive, possessive, jealous, you're mine, touch her or you die sort of vibes. I love when the book has this sort of characteristic for the main character. It is one of my favorite to see. I love seeing when a guy is jealous and when a guy is really possessive. Like, I want them to not want their girl to be with absolutely anyone else. I don't want anybody looking at them. I don't want anybody touching them. I will be jealous and I will want to kill them if, I see somebody making the moves on my woman. It is one of my favorite things to see in a book, like no doubt about it. And today I'm going to be sharing with you a bunch of books that have that sort of vibe in it. The thing is that I feel like, this type of category falls under a lot of different books. You can go like really intense from like, mafia, touch her and you die, all the way to like, you're mine, you belong to me, sweet romance sort of stuff. And today I'm actually going to be sharing with you like, all of the above, like all sorts of different vibes. So in these books, like, that I'm going to share with you, some of them are going to be like, more intense, and some of them are going to be on a little bit of the sweeter side. But I decided to actually put all of these books in order of like, intense all the way down to like, the sweet ones. So you can probably like get a little bit of, an idea of what the intensity is by the part of it is in this video. You know what I mean? Okay. Anyway, I actually decided to make this video because I recently read Crow by A. Zavarelli, and this definitely had the touch her or you die. I will literally shoot a person if they touch my woman sort of thing. Like, it literally happens in that book because this is a mafia book. It's kind of like about this girl who her friend went missing and the police don't want to do anything about it. So she kind of decides like, take it into her own hands and like, go investigate and go undercover in the mafia. And that's when she meets like one of the heads of one of the mafias. And then, they're going to end up having this like crazy intense romance, and she's going to hopefully, go and find her missing friend. And it's very interesting. Like, there's a lot of like mafia wars, different mafias, coming together, fighting, everything along those lines. And it had a lot of really solid mafia-esque, moments. But at the same time, I think the biggest part of this book was like a touch her or you die sort of vibe. Like, this guy literally like went and killed everybody who like made a move on his woman. And it was interesting. I mean, this wasn't my favorite mafia book of all time, but like, if you love like a touch her or you die sort of vibe, then like this is literally like that in a book. Next, I have the Maid series by Danielle, Laurie. So this is currently a collection of 3 books. It's The Sweetest Oblivion, book 2 is The Maddest Obsession, and book 3 is The Darkest Temptation. And all 3 of these books definitely have the touch her or you die sort of vibes because they're all mafia, standalone, interconnected romances, and they were so freaking good. One of my favorite mafia romances I've ever read. So book 1 specifically, I think, is my favorite from the series because this was an arranged marriage, except the guy was arranged to like, marry the girl's sister. And obviously he loved this girl more than like, the sister. So he was very jealous and possessive of her like the entire book. And it was so freaking good. Like, there was a moment in this book where, they were at a party and this girl was talking to like, this other guy, and he like kept looking and being like super, super jealous. So he literally went and like pushed the girl into a pool just so that he didn't have to look at it anymore. Like, literally one of the best scenes from this entire book. And I absolutely loved it. Like, if you really do like, the possessive, like overly jealous sort of vibes going on, then like this series is definitely for you. Like, book 1, arranged marriage, book 2, second chance romance between like, ex like mafia girl sort of thing with like, an FBI agent of sorts. And then book 3 was like a kidnapping Stockholm syndrome romance. And oh my God, so freaking good. All 3 of the books, absolutely loved them, and definitely have, the touch her and you die vibe in it. Next, I have the Dark Verse series by Ronix. So this is a collection of 4 books. You're following one storyline, but 2 different romances. So in book 1 and book 2, you're following like, 2 POVs and 1 specific romance. And then in book 3 and book 4, you continue on with the story, but you're going to be following another set of POVs and a different romance, if that makes sense. And happens to be, I've only read book 1 and book 2 so far because like I finished up book 2, and like, while I still wanted to continue with the actual story, I wanted to stop because like the romance was over, and I never ended up going back to it. But it still is a pretty solid romance if you are okay with third POV. Like, you're following 2 perspectives, but it's in third person. So if you can handle that sort of writing style, then I think you might really enjoy this story. So this is a mafia romance, and you're following this girl who basically like created this code that could potentially take down like an entire mafia, and she thinks that like a rival mafia stole it. Like, she is like, the heir to to like one mafia, and she thinks that like another mafia stole her code. So she kind of like goes and tries to get it back, and then she runs into like, you know, the son of the head of the other mafia, and they're gonna end up having this romance, and they're gonna realize that like, you know, they didn't steal it either, so they're gonna work together to try and get this code back. So it's a very like, you know, interesting story, and because it's mafia, it definitely does come with like, you know, very possessive, jealous, protective-esque sort of vibes going on. And it was a good story. Like I never continued on with it, but like the first two books, the first romance in the story, it was really solid. So I recommend it. Next, I have The Sinner's Duet by Sophie Lark. So it's There Are No Saints, and then the second book is There Is No Devil. And you're following one story, and you're following basically a serial killer romance. So this guy is an actual serial killer. Like, you look up trigger warnings. This book is extremely graphic. Basically, he gets like, you know, his sights set on this girl that was almost killed by another serial killer that this guy happens to know. And when she happens to survive, you know, the almost killing, he basically decides that like he is very into this girl and he wants to stalk her. So that's literally what he does. Like they're both artists. Like she's a starving artist and he is a very, you know, well-off professional artist. And he ends up like giving her like this grant of sorts, ends up getting really close to her, ends up literally stalking her. And then they're going to end up having this like actually crazy romance. So this is a very dark book. It's kind of like, you know, when the villain does bad stuff and then you somehow still like him. But this definitely had the very possessive, you're mine sort of vibe to it, because he was literally stalking her. He literally like claimed her as a person, and it was really good, like very unique, very different from anything I've ever read. But if that sounds like up your alley and you've looked up the trigger warnings and you're cool with everything that's going to go on with this book, then I highly recommend it. Next, I have Hooked by Emily Mcintyre, which is a dark and twisted retelling of Peter Pan. So this was a really good story, mostly because I am a huge fan of Peter Pan. And in this story, you're basically following like Hook, who is out to get revenge on Peter for murdering his parents when he was younger. And the way that he's going to go about that is by basically seducing Peter's daughter, who is named Wendy. So there are a lot of droplets from the Peter Pan story in this book, except it is like all messed up. It's dark, twisted, it's taboo. It is a very good story. It has like the gang sort of vibes. Like it's not a mafia book, but it does have that like mafia dark and twisted feeling in it. And happens to be, if you're into that sort of vibe, if you like Peter Pan, if you like the possessive, obsessive, jealous, everything along those lines sort of feelings, and also like a dark and twisted story where the villain basically wins, then I recommend checking this one out. Next, I have Underlock by Marianaspada, which is a motorcycle club slow burn romance. So you're following this story where this guy owns a tattoo shop and is actually a part of a motorcycle club, and he's going to end up having a relationship with his new receptionist, who happens to be the sister of one of the guys that is in his club. And this book definitely comes with like, you know, this slow burn feeling that Marianaspada usually gives in her books, but it's not as slow as the other books that I've read by her, and it is also like slightly steamier than her other books. So if you did want something by Marianaspada that wasn't like, you know, as achingly slow as you're used to, and you haven't checked out this book yet, then I recommend reading it. Also, if you like motorcycle club vibes, if you like the very like protective, obsessive, jealous, take care of her sick moments, everything along those lines sort of thing, then I recommend checking this one out. I really did enjoy it. I liked the little like darker feeling that it had because of the stuff that they were dealing with the motorcycle club, but it also very much did have the very like protective vibes going on, and I was a huge fan of it, so I recommend it. Next, I have First Semester by QB Tyler, which is a very quick, spicy novella. Like, it's literally only like 177 pages. It's not a full-on story, but it was very good for what it was. Like, I've never really read a spicy like novella like this before, but I really enjoyed it for the quick little short romance that it was. It was basically an age gap teacher-student forbidden romance, and it was really, really solid for a quick, spicy novella. So in this book happens to be like the guy was very, very possessive and jealous, and I absolutely loved that vibe with him. Like, obviously there isn't much going on in this book. You could just assume where it's going, but for what it was really good, and happens to be this guy's jealousy and possessive vibe in the story is, I think, what made this book as good as it was for me. Next, I have Voyeur by Fiona Cole, which is another age gap teacher-student forbidden romance. So in this book, you're following this girl who needed money for tuition for college. So she ends up getting a job at this sex club called Voyeur, where people can basically like anonymously requests for her to do things behind like a one-way mirror. So like if she accepts what they want her to do, then she'll basically like do it, and they can look onto her, but like she doesn't know who requested, she can't see who requested her, anything along those lines. And basically this guy is a part of this sex club, and he basically like sees her and he starts to like keep on requesting her, which is something you're not really supposed to do. Like you're not supposed to like keep on asking for the same person. Like in this club, you're supposed to like just like go with the flow and like just request different people sort of thing. Like it's not necessarily about the person, it's about the act of voyeurism. But he ends up getting like really obsessed with this girl specifically. And then happens to be like, you know, they start school and this girl walks into class one day, and who do you know is her teacher? This guy who has been obsessing over her in the club. So he obviously knows who she is, but she doesn't know who he is. And then basically they end up having a forbidden teacher-student romance, and it's very good. It definitely has the obsessive vibes. It even has like a bit of jealousy vibes at a time, the you're mine vibes, everything along those lines. This was one of the first 5 stars that I gave out for this year, so I obviously highly recommend this book. Next, I have Terms and Conditions by Lauren Asher, which is the second book in the Dreamland Billionaires companion series. And in this book, you're basically following Declan, who is about to become CEO of his family's company. But before he can inherit his position, he basically has to fulfill this clause that his grandfather left for him in his will when he passed away, which is basically that he has to get married and have a child. So he obviously doesn't really care to do this. All he cares about is like, you know, getting his position and working all the time. So he basically decides to have a marriage of convenience with his personal assistant Iris. So that is basically what they do. This is a marriage of convenience book, and it was really good. Like at first you start out where like he literally does not care for this woman, like he doesn't want anything to do with her other than work. And then obviously like he slowly warms up to her, and it turns into like a you're mine, you belong to me sort of vibe. And I absolutely loved it. It was a very good like slow burn romance. I loved seeing the transition in Declan of like literally not caring for her, and then at the end of it was literally like you are mine, you belong to me, nobody else can look at you sort of feeling, you know? So basically this was a good book, one of my favorites from the year. I highly recommend it, and it was good. It was good. That's all I gotta say. And then lastly, I have 4 more books to share with you that I want to do very quickly, only because, like, full disclosure, I liked these books, but I didn't absolutely love them. They were all like kinds of 3 stars to me, but obviously everybody has like different tastes and everybody's looking for something else. So even though these books weren't my favorite, they might end up really working for you. So I wanted to mention them because they all do have this sort of vibe going on in them. But you know, if you don't end up loving them, then don't blame me, because I personally didn't love them either, but they weren't horrible enough for me to like never want to mention them. They were all like a solid 3 stars. So anyway, first up, I have Bad Boys Break Hearts by Michaela Smelcher, which is a college romance between these 2 people who were best friends as children. Then they became strangers, and then they meet again in college when this girl is walking out of this guy's roommate's bedroom, and he basically recognizes her right away, and all of a sudden he's like, what the hell are you doing here? Like, you know, you slept with my roommate, which happens to be she didn't, but he thinks that she did. And he ends up getting like very obsessed with her, like very jealous over her, very like you're mine, you belong to me sort of vibes, even though like they haven't met in like a handful of years, like they haven't known each other since they were children, but they obviously end up having like, you know, some sort of romance, and it was pretty solid. It was a college sports romance. The guy was like a baseball player, and it was solid. It wasn't my favorite, but it was solid. So that is that very you're mine, you belong to me vibes. Anyway, after that, I also have 5 Rounds by Nikki Castle, which is a sports romance that is surrounded by like the MMA world. So like the guy, he is trying to go pro, and the girl is like just very into the sport in general, and happens to be, it's like very heavy on that sort of feeling. Like they're always in the gym, they're always like part of fights, going to fights, things along those lines. So if you are into that sort of vibe, then like you might really enjoy this book because it is very heavy on that. But in the romance department, it happens to be like this haters to lovers sort of thing. So this girl, she's about to get evicted from her apartment, and while she is in between places, she ends up taking her best friend's room for like a week or so, because her best friend is like, you know, going away on business. So he has an empty bed. So she basically takes it. And the only problem with this is that he has a roommate, and she is not a fan of them. Like she's not a fan of the guy. So happens to be they're going to end up like having to share this space for a little bit, and they're going to end up like, you know, doing this like hate sex sort of thing. and then it's obviously going to turn into like, well, I actually like hanging around with you besides for just having sex with you, and then they're obviously going to end up falling for each other. So it was a pretty solid story. I did have like, a little bit of issues with it, but at the end of the day, like it wasn't horrible. It was okay. And I know a lot of people are like huge fans of this. So, maybe check it out if it sounds up your alley, but it definitely did have the jealousy vibes in it. Like that was one of the best parts of the story. Like this guy, he kept getting jealous and possessive over this girl, and it was a really good vibe. So yeah. Next, I have Teardrop Shot by Tijon, which is another sports romance. So in this book, you're following this pro basketball player who goes to like one of those training camps on the off season, and he's gonna end up having a relationship with one of the girls that works there. So it happens to be the girl is like a huge fan of him, and when she meets him, she basically like makes a fool of herself, but he ends up finding her like very intriguing. So they end up forming this like unlikely friendship, and then it's obviously gonna end up turning into like a relationship. And it happens to be he's very like protective of her, and ends up turning into like a very like sweet your mind sort of book. Like it's not intense at all, but it does have that like your mind, protective, maybe a little bit of jealousy here and there in it. So I recommend checking it out. Go into it with low expectations and you might end up being pleasantly surprised. I really did enjoy the romance aspect of it. The thing is like everything that wasn't part of the romance was the parts that like kind of pulled my rating down for this book. So like whatever, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't like the best either. It was a solid 3-star book, but I wanted to mention it in case you were interested in it. And the last book I'm going to share with you is Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score, which is a small town, grumpy sunshine, single mom vibes romance. This girl basically has a twin sister who she's kind of like estranged with, and the twin sister calls her up one day, is like, look, I need your help. So the girl's like, sure, I'll come and help you. Happens to be the twin sister ends up robbing her and leaving her with a niece that she never knew she had. So she's kind of like stuck in this small town with a niece and she doesn't know what to do. So she ends up like just settling down for a little bit, and this guy kind of like basically helps her out. He gives her a place to stay like right next door to him, so they end up becoming neighbors. He ends up like giving her a job at his bar, so he ends up also becoming her boss, and he ends up just basically like being very protective of them and like kind of like getting involved in their life, even though he's like a grump and he really like doesn't care for like relationships like this or anything like that, but it kind of ended up just like happening. So it was very like solid book, a very solid 3 stars. Like it was a little bit longer than I thought it needed to be. Like it was very big book, like 550 pages or so, but it did have a lot of solid vibes to it. And I know that a lot of people are raving about this book at the moment. So if you do like the like protective, obsessive, a little bit of jealous, I feel like maybe, but like definitely like the your mind vibes, then maybe check out this book. It was a solid read, but again, not my favorite overall, but wanted to mention it in case you were interested in it. But anyway, with that said, oh my God, that was a lot of books to share with you. I know this video was like way too long. Totally should have taken out some books, but oops, too late now. So anyway, leave me a comment down below if any of these books sounded interesting to you and you plan on checking them out. And if you did find any good recs and you enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not subscribed, because I would really appreciate it. And anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And until next time, enjoy reading.